meeting is being recorded.
Okay. No. Mir wird auch gesagt. Okay. Hold on a second, Tim.
Okay.
Yeah. Come in. Meeting verlassen? Nein, nicht Meeting verlassen. Nicht Meeting verlassen.
Dieses Meeting wird aufgezeichnet. Okay, einfach okay drücken.
Oh, okay.
Gut.
Okay, good. Okay, Tim, we're ready to go.
All right. Okay, so we'll start early. Does it say
Yeah.
recording in progress on your side?
Yeah, let me see.
It should send you a note saying recording.
It did, and I okayed it.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
good. Because you need to know, you need to approve it. Yeah.
Yes.
All right.
Okay.
So this is official. So let's do this for about an hour, 10:30 to 11:30 my end.
Sure. Go ahead. As long as you are not bored.
No, not at all.
Well, yes, we'll see.
Okay,
Talking about yourself the whole time, it's a bit boring, the whole idea of it for the other person. Go ahead anyway.
What exactly is boring again? Please explain.
No, not for me. I can talk about myself all day and night, but
yeah.
But since we just wanted to talk about my books today, I thought that for you it might be a little bit boring.
Well,
or for the people who might tune into this. But yeah, enough self-effacement. Let's go at it.
You have to give the obligatory self-effacement before diving into your complete.
Yeah, let them know I'm not as cocky as I appear in the course of this thing. Yeah.
Yeah, well, okay. So let me just explain the purpose of this. So I'm trying to start a new YouTube channel, just maybe under my name, maybe called Timothy's Academy, where I'm going to interview people in various fields of endeavor, especially the arts, who are somewhat accomplished as far as I'm concerned. And it just so happens that I have a brother my only brother, who is pretty accomplished writer, in my opinion. I mean, if you get 8 or 9 books published and they're being sold on Amazon, and we won't talk about how many people are buying them. I don't know, and I don't care. The fact is, you put out some pretty quality stuff. I know, because I've edited quite a few of them. I don't agree with everything you write. You know that. And nobody agrees with everything everyone writes. But I think in large part, you're pretty accomplished. And it's not, the purpose of this is not to toot your horn from my end or your end. It's basically to have discussions of literature. I hope to do this maybe weekly, a weekly chat on different aspects of literature. What about the great women writers? What about Hemingway? Is he overrated? What about Shakespeare? Is Shakespeare still relevant in a woke world that we're living in a DEI universe, and so on and so forth? I think there's so many great topics of literature, and you and I have occasional chats on the phone, and you have some very interesting insights. You're very well read. I'm somewhat well read myself. I have a master's in English, a bachelor's in English literature, both from CSUN. And I'm writing books in my own right, but they're not published yet. So I just think it's an interesting thing to be a fly on the wall and listen to chats on great literature and not so great literature, because a lot of stuff you get on YouTube is it's interesting, but I don't see a lot of in-depth chats on literature by people who have at least a modicum of knowledge about it, and that's my purpose here. So it's not necessarily to promote your books. People will buy them if they want. It's but I think it's important for people to know who is this other guy on the other side of the screen who's talking about this. Why should we care about his opinion? So the best thing to do is say, what have you done to this point in a literary sense? So you can even put up each book and show us as you describe it. Start with your book. Your first book was on dueling, right?
Well, not actually. I mean, I count the first 2 volumes, which brings my tally to 8 or 9. You said that correctly. This 2-volume work of social history that I did in 1990. I count that because it was a lot of work, and my name is on the cover, and it's on the bind, it's on the spine, and it's on the title page. It was the 3rd volume of social history essays called Every Man in Europe, from the Greek times to the 20th century. It's about the common man and woman and children. So neglected socioeconomic groups throughout history at that time, social history, this is over 30 years ago, social history was still in its infancy. And my professor, I can tell I'm going on and on about this. I'll make this short. My professor, the advisor for my dissertation, he had done, along with another professor, he had done the first 2 volumes, or the first 2 editions of this 2-volume work. And the summer before I went off to Berlin to write my dissertation, he just sprung it on me. He said, Kevin, I and my colleague, we don't have any desire to do this 3rd edition, although we've signed up for it. Would you do it for us? So I just took the bit between my teeth, and I was working full time, and I was off in a couple months to Germany, and I did the 3rd edition. I'm almost more proud of this than I am of anything else, because I was working to a deadline. Everything else I've done has been on spec. I've just decided to write something and just hope and pray that someone will want it at the end of the day. So I have to mention these 2 books, these 2 volumes, because I did a lot of work. Scoured the whole thing, saw what could remain, what we got to throw out, did my research in the library, got all the permissions. It was a good lesson in organizing a book, how to start it and finish it. And that held me in good stead with writing the dissertation. And then now, turning that dissertation into a book, what you just mentioned, my dueling book. And I'll bring you a shot of that.
And
here's
you're talking about the Everyman in Europe was the project.
Yes. Everyman in Europe, essays in social history.
Can you show us the book cover of Everyman in Europe as well?
Sure. It's hard to come by these days. You don't see it often advertised, but you can find it if you're dying. Actually, I made some fairly good money off of this, because I was given 20% of the royalties, 40% for one professor, 40 for the other. They did the first 2 editions, right? But I did the 3rd, so I got 20% royalties, which is rare. Usually the professor takes all the credit, takes all the money, and just consigns you to a short little mention in the acknowledgments. So my professor, Alan Mitchell, was very generous, as was Istvan Deák, the other professor on the job. And here's volume 1. There you have it, Prentice Hall. And here's volume 2. And I made a lot of money because these were ordered for undergraduate classes. It was a popular book, and that's why a 3rd edition was brought out by Prentice Hall. So I had to mention these, Tim. I'm very fond of them because they made me some money when $1 was still $1 in 1990, and I was needing it because of all my my impoverished situation as a grad student and a postdoc student. So had to mention that. And now we come to the dueling, and that was my big coup at that time, because I wrote this dissertation on dueling in Germany in the late 19th and early 20th century, and I chose the topic not strategically, that I thought, okay, this will this is a really trendy topic. This will really give me a pole position on the job market once I get my PhD and everything. No, I just thought this is a great thing. Hey, dueling, great. Who doesn't love a good duel? Reading about it or watching it in the cinema. And so I seized on this. And for once, something I loved paid off in a big way, because Princeton University Press decided to publish it. And there's no better press in the academic world, particularly in history, I might say, at least at that time, than Princeton University Press. And so I'm quite proud of this. And just to show you how extensive my research was, the picture itself was something I found in the archives. Okay. So top to bottom, I did this thing on my own. It was the first book in English on the specific subject of German dueling, and it was one of the first books ever on the subject. And so that's still being published. It came out in a paperback edition. It came out in came out with the Princeton Legacy Library in 2014. this is, I think they basically take all the books that they've published, if there's not something in the meantime has emerged objectionable about them, if you know what I mean. And they just, this is basically their fancy term for print on demand. But I love that phrase, Princeton Legacy Library. It just adds to the Princeton, you know, it's just like, I'll take it.
Wasn't it nominated for Encyclopedia Britannica Book of the Century, something like that?
Right, when we still had encyclopedias and not just Wikipedia. For all you kids out there born in the 21st century or the late 20th, we used to have this thing called the Encyclopedia Britannica. And it was basically the mother of all encyclopedias. Still is, for all I know, although it's online. I think primarily is the use that people get out of it. Yes, and every year at that point, they had a list of books in various subject areas. Psychology, anthropology, history, I don't know, 10, 15, 20 books each category. And mine was chosen in the history category. One of their books of the year. So yeah, another little feather in my cap, I guess. So that was a nice, as I say, it was a real coup, that whole thing with Princeton, getting my dissertation, which I had just done for the sheer joy of it. And I must say, my professor, Alan Mitchell, he allowed that. He didn't just say, oh, that's not an important topic. We have to have something, you know, about the socioeconomic effects of, the modernization of agriculture in Prussia in the 1840s or something. You know, some really arcane thing. He just said, yeah, go at it, kid. He trusted me. I like that. So that, anyway, that's that.
Now I mentioned that in the Encyclopedia Britannica, I thought it had been chosen as one of the books of the century, and you said it was chosen as the book of the year.
No, we can say that. We'll let the Encyclopedia Britannica correct us on that, I suppose. Maybe they meant that one of the books of the century. They just it fell under the only category they had at that time, which is books of the year.
Book of the year. Okay, but what year was that it was the book of the year?
1995 is when it came out as a book of the year. So
gotcha.
It had been published in 1994.
Okay.
And it's still out there. It's being taught in the university courses in America. And I'm also sorry.
Subtitle is The Cult of Honor in Fin de Siècle, Germany, right?
Correct. So we're basically talking, 18s till the start of the First World War.
Okay, and is that still published and still purchasable on Amazon and
whatnot? Yeah. Well, again, primarily this version of it, because the book's 30 years old at this point, so there are very few copies of the original hardcover or the paperback, which came out in 1997. But this is what you will usually find if you want to read the book.
Okay, so you get your PhD from that point, and what was your PhD in?
Modern. Well, the broad category I'm looking at the diploma right now was European history, but it was late modern European history, which for those of you who are not in the guild means from the French Revolution to the present day. So from 1789, and for all intents and purposes back then, it meant until 1945, right? It meant till the end of the Second World War.
Gotcha.
So late modern European history, Germany.
And that book covers the era we call the Wilhelmine period, 1871 to 1914, between the Franco-Prussian War.
Right. That's usually, not to correct you, you're very well informed, but to be exact about it, 1871 to 1918 that's the Imperial Germany.
Okay.
Period. The Wilhelmine era is usually, although his grandfather was Wilhelm I, yes, indeed, 1871 to 1888. The Wilhelmine era is usually designated Wilhelm II, with the dastardly mustaches.
And
he ascended to the throne as emperor in 1888 till his abdication in 1918. So that 30-year period is the Wilhelmine period, technically.
Gotcha. Okay. And wait, Wilhelmine period, 1871 to.
Well, Imperial Germany, 1871 to 1918, the Wilhelmine era, usually this 30-year stretch of Wilhelm II, the grandson of Wilhelm I, 1888 to 1980.
Ah, gotcha.
Right.
Very,
It's tricky,
very
but yeah,
in depth.
that's falling back on some of my historiographic pedantry.
There we go. And my ignorance of same. Okay,
No.
so how did you make a transition from getting your PhD, getting this published, and then writing your first novel, which, if correct me if I'm wrong, is Surfer Boy?
Right. That's not wrong. That is exactly it. Yes.
Or you had a set of short stories before that, right?
Right.
With
Right.
a friend of yours. Would you go ahead
Right.
and
Well, yeah, I'll try not to make this too long. I can see how, as I'm going back in my memory, like an old man, like the old man I am, going back in my memory, and one thing leads to the next, and at
right.
a certain point, you look up and everyone's snoring. Okay, yes, that was the big drama of my life. I couldn't get a job that, let's say, I wanted in academia back then. It was sort of a matter of irreconcilable differences between myself and the academy. Let's just leave it at that. I write about it in a book which we'll get to called Postdoc. That's a later novel of mine. And there's a book that I've just finished. It hasn't been accepted for publication by anyone yet, but it's my fifth novel. I just finished it recently. It's about that very period that you're asking about, the period in the mid-90s, to be exact, when I was transitioning out of academia and into trying to become a writer. How's that for qualification? I didn't become a writer. It takes a while to become one, I think. I should imagine. I should hope, actually. And that was it. I was out of a job. We were about 1994. And I was in Berlin, and I decided, okay, well, you've always really wanted to write. And like a lot of academics, they really want to write. They don't want to write studies of other writers if you're like in the English field or whatever. They want to write their own stuff. And so I just thought, well, go to it, boy. Here's a great chance. You're still young enough. No one's stopping you. It's one of the cheapest activities you can ever imagine. You need paper. You need, in my case, it was a typewriter. So you need typewriter ribbon. You need money for envelopes, and you need postage to the States, is where I was usually sending my stuff. And you need postage for a self-addressed stamped envelope, an SASE in the parlance. So one of the cheapest activities you could possibly imagine. And I was living in a part of Berlin that was very cheap. It's Prenzlauer Berg, a part of former East Berlin. Kind of this artsy. The comparable thing would be like Montparnasse in the 1920s. Very comparable. Yeah, and because after this First World War, you have this sort of watershed, and then all these artists come to Paris, and sort of the same thing. You have the wall come down, and all these artists, they flood into Eastern Germany. And I was among them. And in this book that I've just written, the fifth novel, it talks about that transition. So how did I do it? Basically, I just wrote and realized how bad and worse it was. Until finally, I had a bunch of short stories. I met up with another American abroad who was also, trying to become a writer, but he had actually published something. Make note, I didn't publish a thing in these 4 or 5 years that I was trying to become a writer. He had. So he kind of took me in hand, gave me a few tips, and we decided at a certain point, well, he's got a lot of stories about being an American in Berlin, more specifically. I do too. Let's pool them. Then he took the initiative and started sending them out to German publishing houses, and one eventually accepted them and thought they were great stuff. The publishing house was called Kiepenheuer and Witsch. They're a very prestigious publishing house. And they specialize, believe it or not, in translated works of great American authors. I said, hey, well, I'm right on the right track here. Translated works of great American authors, because it was published in German. And then that was 1998. And that too, that sold quite well. That it had 6,000 copies, which was a pretty good addition for two complete unknowns in Americans. You know, I mean, they were publishing famous Americans like Don DeLillo and Jonathan Franzen, I believe. Could be mistaken on that, but the big names at that time. And we were no names. Nonetheless, we sold out, I believe, our first 6,000 edition. And I felt I was on my way. So now we get on to the next step. What's the next step? It is the novel, I felt. Okay, good.
Okay, so wait, stop right there. So the name of your short story book is what?
Oh, yeah. Zwei Amerikaner im deutschen Exil. Two Americans in German exile. Because we both wrote the stories.
You wrote it with a guy where you alternated short stories.
It basically boils down to this. It sounds too neat to be true, but it basically boiled down to 1/3 of the stories. There are about 35, 40 stories. I forget exactly. Very short. And because the whole book was about 150 pages. So about 1/3 of the stories were his, 1/3 of the stories were mine, and 1/3 were stories that we got together on. That's how it broke down.
Okay.
They're humorous. They're humorous, right? We're making fun of the Germans, making fun of ourselves. You know, it's satirical work.
Okay, and you told we could say that it's politically incorrect.
Just like my dueling book, right?
You're making fun of the German pretensions toward duels and whatnot.
I got little shots in against our present day society. Like one joke I remember was where in the Middle Ages they sometimes would have duels between men and women, and the man, he would wallow waist deep in a hole, and he'd have whatever, a shield and something to defend himself. Well, the woman could stand on her own 2 feet and hit down upon him with a cudgel or something, right? They're trying to equalize the combat, I guess, was the notion. And I made the little crack, an early manifestation of affirmative action, stuff like that. You know, I would make these little cracks, which many critics commented on. They didn't like it. They didn't like it at all. They didn't like the humorous take. They thought I was just being too flippant about a very serious theme. But that told me a lot. That told me, well, maybe I'm in the wrong profession. Maybe I should go out. This is even before my romance with academia came to an end. I was thinking, well, maybe if these guys aren't taking a liking to what is essentially who I am, it's my style, how I want to write, then maybe I'm in the wrong game, right? And then we both sort of decided for each other, the Academy and myself, that you are in the wrong game. So I started writing.
And as far as I know, two of your favorite writers are Raymond Chandler and Charles Bukowski, who are very humorous and witty. And so you kind of latch on to them as a model for what you want to do outside of academia.
No question. Every writer, this is good to mention in terms of trying to become a writer at the time, you imitate. You imitate your betters. You imitate those that you admire, that you get turned on by when you read. And so, yeah, I did take Chandler and Bukowski as two of my guys that I would like to write like. And of course, when you imitate it at the very beginning, even if you do it well, it just falls flat because it's not you. It's even if you do the imitation well. I remember one time entering a Raymond Chandler imitation prose contest or something. It's like La Jolla, where I went to school, UCSD, and where Chandler lived for a while. They had this annual contest. And I said, okay, good. That's exactly what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to imitate Chandler at this point in my career in the 90s. And I entered that contest 3 or 4 times, sending what I thought were great spoofs. Like they have this Hemingway imitation contest you've heard about in Key West.
Where they Hemingway contest.
And then George Plimpton had a bad Hemingway contest where you had to write like bad Hemingway, and so I did the same thing. It wasn't bad Chandler. It was just like, fondly make fun of him kind of imitative.
And I forget, it's been a while since I got my master's. Harold Bloom had a literary theory about this, where you have an author who you latch on to, and you eventually have to move beyond them and kill them off, so to speak, in the Oedipal sense, metaphorically speaking, in order to establish your own identity. What was the name of that theory that Harold Bloom had concerning this process?
The anxiety of influence,
The anxiety of influence, meaning every
something like that.
author. Yeah, Harold Bloom, who was a great literary critic. You both of
Oh
us.
yeah, I much admire him. Yes.
He had this theory that called the anxiety. This is for people who might be watching this who might not be familiar with him. He had a famous theory called the anxiety of influence, saying that everyone who wants to be a great writer has an author they love and imitate in a lot of ways, even if unconsciously. And a certain anxiety arises that you can't just go on imitating them. You have to eventually move on from them and kill them off in an Oedipal sense, where he kills his father, marries the mother. You don't have to marry the mother, but you do have to kill off the father author mentally and emotionally and psychologically in order to establish your own identity eventually. And I'm hoping you've been able to complete that process, and you're not just going to be imitating Bukowski and Chandler and Hemingway and all that.
Yes, I think I have with this fourth novel, which we'll get to, which is the forthcoming one. I think I finally have. I mean, the whole way you think you are, right? All the time you think you are. It's like, oh yeah, I'm imitating, but my own man, look at this Surfer Boy. Wow, what an original work. 10, 15 years later, you look back, it's like, ooh, that was a real trying a bit too hard to be like your witty, model, Mr. Raymond Chandler, trying a bit too hard here, But with this last one, I think I'm. Of course, I was saying that with the three novels previous. I think I got it. I think it's right there now. But I really think, I think at the age of 62, if you aren't there now, you're never going to get there. So I'm going to say yes with this fourth novel, which we'll get to. I think I've established my own, I think just for myself. I don't care what any of the Harold Blooms or the critics say. I think for myself, I feel as if I finally cut myself free of my intellectual mentors, Chandler, of course, as you mentioned, Bukowski, Hemingway too. I mean, Hemingway was a big influence.
I remember, if I may be so candid, I've often been one of the first editors of whatever manuscripts you've had, and I remember early on.
Tim has been a great in all this, no question.
Oh, what did you say? I'm sorry.
For the audience out there, not that you are there alone saying it, but I'm affirming it. Yes, Tim, my brother, has been an excellent editor on much of my work.
Okay, thank you for that. And I will say, if you don't mind me saying so, I remember early on, I sensed a lot of Hemingway imitation in your earlier short stories, and I would call you out on it. I'd write in the margin, this sounds too much like Hemingway, Kev. Let's hear your own voice. Right,
and that stuff is a lot of that stuff was expunged before it hit print. But there's still some of it remains, and you do kind of wince when you go over that. It's not like I read my books all the time, but sometimes you have to go back over them. I've had several editions, for example, of Surfer Boy. I don't know if we want to get into that.
Well, let's talk. Okay, so we're trying to keep this to an hour because we can both be very long-winded and talk for hours about subjects we love, literature. We know that. So for our audience, we'll try to curtail it. So we're halfway through here. So we got you right up to Surfer Boy. So let's talk about Surfer Boy real quick and then move on to the next.
So after this Zwei Amerikaner im deutschen Exil that was published in 1998, I immediately got into my what I wanted to become my novel. And this was based on a bunch of short stories I'd been scribbling over the years about my days surfing. And I took a look at them and I thought, okay, good, you got some good stuff here, but how does it congeal into a 250-page novel? So that was the work then. The material was there, but it was making it into a novel with congruity between the various chapters and an overall narrative and character developmental arc, shall we say. And I had to learn all those things, because I had mentors. I had, real life mentors like my friend Adam Blauhut, who helped me out on this first book, Zwei Amerikaner im deutschen Exil. But I didn't know anyone else who had written a novel, okay? Yeah, you can read all the advice you want, and you can have your models. James M. Cain is another one. I like Los Angeles writers, as we've noted. And but there's nothing like having a live person who has done this before you read the manuscript. Not even you had written a novel, and read the manuscript and say, no, look, this doesn't work, right? So it was really trial and error, but you learn a heck of a lot that way. It's painful, but like with many experiences, at the end of it, you can sometimes look back and say, boy, that was a very valuable experience.
Can you
And
show us the book cover of
Yeah,
Surfer Boy?
sure. Yeah, there's
you have a
several.
German edition and an English edition.
Yeah, I got them all here. Here's the 2007 German edition, and so my first published novel in German. I speak German, and I work as a translator from the German and the French into the English, so I'm pretty good at.
So did
German.
you write the German edition, or did someone translate it?
No, it was translated by a woman named Julia Ritter, who was also a friend, and she did a fine job. But I had to hover over her shoulder because there's
a lot of lingo,
a lot of terminology that just doesn't translate. Yeah.
How do you translate the word cowabunga into German?
Well, that was our simple-minded solution to a lot of these translation problems. Simply, you use the original English. And I had, at the back I had a glossary of the various terms for the Germans, but it's also good for the Americans because not everyone grows up in a surf culture where it's sort of so. And here was the first English edition. I like the cover.
That's a good one.
Yeah, it's a good one. I like it. Unfortunately, there was a falling out between me and the editor of the publishing house in England, and we parted ways without too many books being published, if any at all. But I have a few copies of my own, and I'm quite fond of this cover. It's very cool.
It is nice.
So, yeah. And then, so I took the rights to that book in English, and I tried to hawk them around. No one wanted the book. As well as the German, because it so happens that this first German edition, it went bankrupt. The publishing house. It was a new publishing house, and they just simply went bankrupt. So I was out with both my editions, German and English. I was out on the street again, trying
that's a bad omen for your first novel, my friend.
Yeah, well, but that's like a good lesson. You keep hammering away, and I know it's disappointing for people to hear because that's what everyone says. But if you give up, then it's your fault. You stopped. Right. You did. Right. And if you don't give up and you keep doing it, and no one wants to publish your book, and you feel like you're not getting any better. Well, these are the times that try men's souls. You have to figure it out. Are you going to keep doing this or not? And I was on the verge of not stopping, but becoming very discouraged and just saying, I don't know, maybe I'll set aside this writing project for a couple of years, and knowing that if I did that, I'd probably never come back to it. Anyway, but I kept talking the book around, had an agent, that fell through. Finally got in 2015, the book picked up by a very nice publishing house in Germany, and you can see they kind of used the motif from the original German version. Instead of slanting, they put it straight. That was better, a little bit better, a little more realistic. Mare Verlag, M-A-R-E, and they specialize in books about the ocean. They have a magazine for which I've written several surf articles, and they're a very classy, mid-sized German publishing house. So I was very pleased to hook up with them, and they've done right by my book. They have neither gone under, nor have they been difficult to work with. They've been a dream. So I have only good things to say about Mare Verlag. The English edition was finally picked up by PalmArt Press, which is the publishing house that I publish most of my stuff with these days. And it's run by a woman, an American woman from Ohio, Catherine Nicely. PalmArt Press. Don't ask me about the name; it's rather complicated. But anyway, that is the name of the publishing house here in Berlin. So yeah, it's kind of nice. I have an American publisher, but she's just about an hour away with the S-Bahn, the surface train from where I live here on the outskirts of Berlin. So that's a kind of a nice setup there. And this picture. That's not me. I knew him when we were surfers, so I thought, hey, look, we put his picture on the cover, for a book that I'd written about myself.
Hey, by the way,
so that's the first novel. Taking it through a few years forward.
Kevin, things kind of froze up right there on my end when you started to explain who is actually the surfer on there. Can you say that again?
Sure. I think it's a very nice cover. We have over the years, we've gotten some nice quotes from mainly German periodicals. So we had some nice stuff there.
That's not you on the cover.
No, it's my ex-brother-in-law. And he was so kind as to lend me the photo. And I don't, as I'm telling the world now, it's not me, so I'm not pretending, but that could have been me. We had the same look, same blonde hair. I had hair then, obviously, when you're 18.
Yeah.
And we had the same build, like the same height, same build, same everything. He was probably a little bit better surfer than me, but that could have been me.
You, in fact, have a picture at the back of one of the editions that shows you with your surf club at your high school.
Yeah, it's in all the editions, and this is it. This is probably the best shot of it. It's me. I was in a surf club in high school.
Where are you in there?
I'm right up here.
The one blonde guy.
No, there's a few more blonde guys, but I'm the top blonde guy.
the top blonde. All right.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
So that was my first surf novel. That was my first novel. It was the first pure surf novel in the history of novels. It was only about surfing. Because usually you have so-called surf novels, but they're embedded in a larger drama. Some kind of
where surfing is an element.
And in the meantime, some police thriller, and the guy who's the detective on the case, in his free time he surfs, and maybe meets a nice girl out there in the water, and they become lovers or something. It's some kind of a hackneyed, stupid crap, And so I decided I'm just going to do a surf novel about surfing, and I think it succeeded. Look, 4 publishing houses wanted it, so
when I read that, I feel like I'm reading. There's a Hemingway element. I feel like I'm reading Death in the Afternoon of Hemingway, in the sense of him describing in detail the craft of how the matador holds the cape, and how he does this maneuver and how he does that maneuver, talking about describing a man doing a task and doing it well. And was there any influence from Hemingway's ethos of the purpose of life is to learn to do something and do it well?
Yes, as you well know, Death in the Afternoon, I think, is one of Hemingway's greatest works, and it's often overlooked. When they talk about Hemingway, they almost never mention Death in the Afternoon. For one thing, it's politically incorrect to like bullfighting, right? And for another, it's not a novel. It's not his short stories. He was the great master of the short story, and it just sort of falls between the cracks. But not with me. I think that's a great example of his kingly prose.
I mean, wouldn't you say that Death in the Afternoon and Sun Also Rises are his 2 greatest novels? Maybe Old Man and the Sea as top 3. Hello? I guess we're freezing up again. So we lost him. Hello? 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 I can't hear you. There's no audio. Can you unmute your microphone?
I got it now.
Okay,
Okay.
good. Yeah. Okay, so we lost you in where I made the comment that I think his three greatest novels are probably Death in the Afternoon, Sun Also Rises, and The
Well,
Old Man and the Sea.
but you can't call that a novel, Tim. You can't call Death in the Afternoon a novel.
Oh, three
You
greatest
really can't.
books. Three greatest
It's-
books.
Yeah, great, fine.
Okay. All right. But
Definitely.
anyway, we'll do a whole Hemingway session maybe next time. What's your
Yeah.
next book after Surfer Boy?
So after Surfer Boy, I decided, okay, I'm an old hand at the novel writing business. Got that one licked, and I decided, yeah, I did. I thought it. Look, I still think it's a good novel. Okay,
Okay.
I think
It is really good.
It's a good small novel. Yeah,
Very
and
good.
right, and I thought, okay, let's go on to something else. I mean, I'd spent over 10 years writing it and trying to get it out to various publishers. So actually, the last thing I wanted to do was start on another novel, to tell you the truth, despite all I'd learned in the process. And I thought, okay, let's do something different. What could be more different than my next project, which was that I wanted to write an epic poem. Okay, first, crazy element one. Crazy element two was I wanted to write an epic poem about Errol Flynn, who these days is not as well known as I thought he should have been. I mean, I mentioned Errol Flynn to a lot of people. They just, their eyes glaze over. Like, who? All right, that's very disappointing. But he was one of the great Hollywood stars of his era, the 30s and 40s, when he was at his height. And he starred in many films just to prep the public on this. He was in The Seahawk. He was in The Adventures of Robin Hood. He was in Captain Blood. He was in The Charge of the Light Brigade. He played these heroic, epic roles. Okay, now how am I going to do this? Well, I was also a great fan of Lord Byron. I don't think he needs any explanation. One of the great romantic poets, very heroic figure in and of himself. And he had written a work called Don Juan, as the English perversely pronounce it, but we would just call it the Don Juan.
Kevin, your audio is not on. It phased out. Your
That's the
audio.
title of it, and it
Oh,
was
there
about
it is. There it is. There it is.
It's not on my audio.
It is now. It is now.
Okay.
It went out.
Okay, fine. And I thought I would take the Don Juan stanza of Byron and his work Don Juan, the Don Juan stanza being an ottava rima stanza. I won't get into it, but it's basically 8 lines. And I did this, about 1,200 times, this ottava rima stanza, to write this epic work on Errol Flynn, right?
Okay.
It took from inception of the project, late 2006, after I'd signed my 2018, 12 years to complete this. And I think I'm proudest of this book just because of its total lunacy. It just, it's a mad endeavor.
Can you show it to us?
Yeah, sure. Here's the hardcover that came out 2018. Whoops. Oh, no, here it is. Okay.
Okay, Kev, your video image is
Get back
freezing.
on it.
Okay, there we go. There we go. We're back. We're back. Now your audio's out. Your audio is out. No audio.
me.
Oh, there you go. We're back. We're back.
Okay, I don't know what's going on, but
We'll figure
anyway.
it out afterwards. We'll figure out the technical aspects.
Okay. Okay. Well, and then the soft cover
Okay, we
came out.
didn't see the hardcover because you were frozen there.
Oh, okay. Well, here's the hardcover, 2018, published by PalmArt Press.
Okay.
The Berlin publishing house run by the American woman Catherine Nicely. Right. Here's the back of it. Shows Flynn climbing the mast on his boat, and you see how thick it is. And here you get some impression of the Vltava Rima stanza. Okay. And that was a great project. I mean, even if had I never published it, because I anticipated that it would never be published, I still had a great time doing it.
Mm.
And that, let me just tell you, all you prospective writers out there, that's the main thing. If you love your writing, it doesn't really matter if you get it published. It'll hurt. It'll be painful not to see your baby out there read by other people. But I've spent so many years with works that have been rejected time and again by hundreds of agents, primarily in America, hundreds of publishing houses, but primarily you go through the agents these days. So that's been my experience. And you inure yourself to rejection, and you say, "Is this worth it?" And you say to yourself, at least in my case, "Yes, I enjoy this. This is a lot of fun." So don't try and write for money. That'll be the beginning of your downfall, I think.
Well, you know,
just write for the sheer love of it and see what happens. And if it doesn't work, then it didn't work, but you gave it a shot.
It reminds me of that story I think I mentioned to you when I was doing my master's degree. I had to use Cosima Wagner's diaries for a lot of it, of what I was writing about.
Which I have here in my bookcase. It's a great little work.
It's wonderful to know.
He said he hasn't published anything, but that's been technically published. It's a great scholarly effort.
Yes, and I remember in there where I think it was in those diaries where Cosima says to Wagner, "Oh, look, they're going to do the England the premiere of your Tristan und Isolde in London," and Wagner didn't show much interest in that. And she said, "Well, why aren't you more enthusiastic?" He says, "Well, they're only getting the shell of the thing. The joy in it was the writing of it."
Right, and that's why I can't understand writers who say that they hate the writing. I'm like, what? You hate the writing? These must be guys who feel like they're on the treadmill, like they wrote something and it made a big hit, and now they're publishers and their readers expect them to write kind of the same thing every time. That must be the reason, because I love waking up in the morning, getting my coffee, sitting down at my computer, and just hammering away at the keyboard on whatever has possessed me imaginatively. I think that's great.
And just the Wagner analogy is pretty good, because if you listen to all 10 of Wagner's mature opera / music dramas, they all inhabit a completely different sound world. You know, Tannhäuser sounds nothing like Flying Dutchman, which sounds nothing like Lohengrin, which sounds nothing like Tristan und Isolde, which sounds nothing like The Ring, which sounds nothing like Meistersinger, and which sounds nothing like Parsifal. You hear me? Every one of those, you could tell it's Wagner just listening to a couple bars, but it's a completely different sound world in each one. Now, and you have such a nice variety too, because after you write Surfer Boy, and after you write the Errol Flynn epic, you then write Berlin Tango.
Right, which was actually published before the Errol Flynn effort, but I mentioned the Flynn effort first because that was commenced in 2006. The Berlin Tango novel, which is basically a love story, and it takes place in the tango milieu of Berlin. That's all we need to know. That was begun about 2011, 2012. I knew that the Flynn at that point was going to be a long-term project, so I couldn't maybe put everything on the back burner while I was finishing my Flynn. It could be decades, right? I didn't know when it was going to be finished. So I started this next novel, and I did a little tango dancing, and I wrote a love story. I'd always wanted to write a love story. I mean, I thought that was sort of something that every writer should do at some point. And so I did it, and I think it's a successful novel. You read it. You did a fine job of suggesting certain things. I took some suggestions, others I didn't. But I think it's a successful novel. It's here's a. Here was the German edition. An artist friend of mine did the cover.
What is that a
Kind
picture of? A couple pairs of bare legs?
It's bare. It's bare. It's a nude. It's a nude of a couple dancing, and it's basically it's him and his wife. If you want to know, and he sketched it from a mirror image, and they're both tango dancers, and he's an artist. And I thought, well, great. So I got this from him. It's published by a German publishing house. And then the English edition was published, that was 2016. This was 2020. And this again is by my old standby PalmArt Press. Okay. This is the English edition. And yeah, so that was my second, the sophomore novel, always pretty tricky, right? And it's a completely different subject, right? Berlin Tango. But it is in line with what you said about my Hemingway influence, the Death in the Afternoon. Again, it gets in some of the technical aspects of tango, broadens them out in terms of their wider meaning psychologically. Right, so that took me several years to write, and it got published in 2016.
Okay.
That's that.
And then
Second novel.
After Berlin Tango, isn't it postdoc?
Well, yeah. Then came the Flynn, of course, 2018, and then after Flynn, I decided, okay, I don't want to write another epic novel or epic poem. Thank you. But I do want to do another novel, and I had another novel all ready to go, and I had it ready to go for years, and it was about my life in academia. And I had wanted to write this novel for the longest time because I found it to be great comic material. And I think it turned out to be that way. The novel is the shortest one I've written so far. It was, short, snappy, about 200 pages, a little over. And it's about my life in academia. Again, these are all novelized versions, make no mistake. A lot of it's based on my life, quite a bit. Berlin Tango, less than any of the three, I might add. But the postdoc was very closely based on my own experience of academia. Then I changed all the names of the universities and even towns I was in just to make sure I wasn't libeling anyone. But that was a lot of fun, and that came out in 2021.
Can we see the cover of that one?
Yeah, it's not much to see. I wanted to keep it sort of bland and nondescript because we couldn't figure out anything. What are you going to have? Some guy, sitting at a desk, puzzling over some manuscript? It didn't. Nothing very exciting lent itself.
Yeah, and you don't want to pigeonhole this work into any one iconic image because, like with the Surfer Boy, you can put a surfboard because that's what it's about.
Right.
Because this is so freewheeling that you want to keep it as generic as possible.
We chose a very sober-minded cover. I mean, this is like
it's hard for us to read on the video. What is the subtitle below
it's
the word?
Yeah, postdoc: The Foreign and Other Misadventures of a Ne'er-do-well Scholar. So it's about a guy who's basically a drunk. He doesn't like to work. He's a terrible teacher. I really took a lot from Bukowski here, right? More from Bukowski than from my own life, I must say. I mean, I performed rather well during my years in the academy, I must say. I wasn't, a ne'er-do-well. I was very responsible and towed the line. But here was like my parting shot at academia, right? Here's like, okay, good. I have nothing to lose. I'm out of the whole game. Now I can tell them what I really was thinking the whole time. In the person of this uh, alter ego of mine, who appears in all 3, 4, 5, now 6 books, which we'll talk about. These others that haven't been quite published. Steve McElhenny is his name, Steve McElhenny. And that name, in case anyone's interested, it has to do with the fact that, it's kind of like mine, Kevin McAleer, right? Kind of Irish extraction. But my favorite running back is Hugh McElhenny. He was a great running back for the 49ers in the 40s and 50s. And he was a great California track athlete. And I ran a little track. And so he was the most exciting runner I've ever seen in the old NFL football films. The guy he'd hurdle people. He was hurdling people before they were doing that, 20, 30, 40 years later, because he was a hurdler. He was a state champion hurdler. So he would hurdle people on the football field. He'd do turnarounds. He'd do Gale Sayers cuts, just incredible stuff. So this name is sort of my homage to the great Hugh McElhenny.
Nice.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll put a link to Hugh McElhenny highlights below this video.
Oh yeah, they'll all race to buy my book then. I'll tell you. That'll get them juiced, right? They'll see that stuff. Yeah.
Okay, so Kev, we've only got about 5-10 minutes left. So that is your whole oeuvre right there that we've seen to this point, right?
I think we're pretty much. We didn't see the cover of Zwei Amerikaner, but that doesn't matter. Yeah, that's basically it. The fourth novel, as I've mentioned, or did I mention? Yeah, I think I did mention, called L.A. Kid, and I don't have a book available now because it's coming out in September.
I'll have a link for it from the PalmArt Press edition.
Yeah, that's the book that's closest to my own life. It's a novel though, and it's about growing up in the 60s and 70s, and I was kind of an athletic kid, and it put me in different sports situations, which I found to be hilarious in retrospect. The coaches, and some of the guys you dealt with. There's some surfing there, some bodybuilding, a couple movie stars, and L.A. Kid. That's coming out in September. So look for it at a fine bookstore near you.
And don't you have another book that's in the works concerning how you became a writer in Berlin, and even the German government apparently gave you a grant for this one?
Right. Yeah. The Berlin Senate gave me 8,000 euros to hammer away at.
How did that happen?
Well, as it often happens, I think they were looking to give the money away. I was an available candidate. It was a non-German prose writing stipend. So for foreigners living in Berlin, you had to have Berlin residency. I happen to have not only Berlin residency, but I have German citizenship, dual American and German citizenship. And they were looking for writers who had their residence in Berlin, but wrote in another language. And got wind of it, and they threw some money my way. And 8,000 euros isn't what it used to be, but especially with this inflation. But that was about 3 years ago. It did help a great deal.
And you actually applied for that and sent them some of the
material?
material?
I applied. Yeah, I applied. Yeah, I had to apply. They didn't just come to my door with a bag full of cash. Here you go. Hear what a great writer you are, kiddo. Here you go. No, but it's interesting you mentioned that, because it is. One does like the recognition, the external recognition. It's hard to just run on your own energy over decades. You want to get a little bit of feedback, no matter how strong a personality you are and how disciplined you are, you want a little feedback. And that was nice to get that, some real recognition, because it was based on some of the stuff I'd written before and all the other thing, the proposal I made. So, some writers get MacArthur, genius grants for millions of dollars, but hey, little steps for little feet, and I'll take it. And yeah, that's the one we mentioned earlier about me becoming a writer in Berlin post-wall in the 90s. And that's finished. I haven't gotten a publisher quite yet, but that's done. And the sixth one I'm working on right now is something that's essentially done. I have a good, fair first draft. And the topic of that, as I told you earlier, will be kept a secret until further notice.
Okay.
for reasons entirely of my own.
Okay.
Not that it's some wildly imaginative subject, but just for reasons of my own, I'm not going to broadcast it.
Okay, so now we're almost at the end of this little session here. So what I'd like to do is, since you've had kind of a lifelong bromance with Ernest Hemingway, his novels and his writing, sometimes more embracing him and sometimes rejecting some of what he does in our conversation, like you mentioned to me. So I think it would be interesting next week when we do the next hour, we spend a whole hour on everything Hemingway wrote and your opinions of same.
Papa, yes, you have to grapple with the man if you're an American writer.
Absolutely.
You can't just ignore him like Mr. However much I love him, Mr. Gore Vidal seems to sort of dismiss him as a short story writer. No, he was much more than that. And we can talk about that. Yeah.
Okay, so this is good to know your survey of your own works, and now we'll move on to all the other writers out there. And I just thought it was important for people to know who you are and why, what your background is, because I think you have something to say and something interesting.
Well, yeah, and as a trained historian, we have to vet our sources. Not good that the public now knows, take them or leave them, but you know whence they come.
Oh, okay.
And whither we go with them shall be seen.
we missed.
But Hemingway,
Kevin, you froze up. You froze up right there. So
some of my most eloquent words this session. But all I was saying is that as a trained historian, one of the first things you learn is to vet your sources.
So I'm vetting my source here before we.
And it's good that people know.
Got it.
Right. So the public knows with whom they're dealing.
That is correct. That is correct.
Spouting all these opinions. Yeah, so you can take them for what they're worth. If you think the guy writes surf novels and stuff about tango, I can't take him seriously. Well, okay, good. Then don't. Your thing. But you should read my books first, by the way, before you come to that.
Okay. All right, Kevin. With that we'll finish our session. Thank you very much for your time, and we'll see you next week.
Okay. Thank you. See you later.
Bye now.